end-to-end record is hard. Riders must cover a gruelling 839 miles from Land's End at the very bottom of the UK all the way to John O'Groats in Scotland as quickly as humanly possible. In fact, it's so hard there have been less than 30 successful attempts by both men and women in nearly 140 years. And the men's record has been considered unbeatable since Gethin Butler clocked 44 hours, 4 minutes and 19 seconds in 2001. At 8 a.m. on a Friday in June 2018, Michael Broadwith began his attempt to join this elite club.
You got this!
If that's the case, then I think we've got a problem.
Giving it the best shot, so we're very proud of you.
My name's Mike Broadwith and I'm a maths teacher. I used to do some cross-country running at school, which was pretty much the first sport I was any good at. Don't quite have the coordination for rugby or anything like that. When I finished my degree, my parents bought me a bike as a present, and I started using that to commute to work and back as a teacher, and joined the local cycling club, Welling Wheelers, and also started doing some time trials, you know, kind of like anyone does really, local club 10s, really enjoyed them. From then really, built up to doing longer and longer races. There's a few reasons why I ended up doing 24-hour racing. On one level, I'm just not quite quick enough to do shorter, faster races. I've got particularly non-aerodynamic shoulders, which are a hindrance in trying to actually go quickly. So a race where the emphasis isn't actually on going quickly probably suits me. I like the narrative of a longer race. There's a lot more to think about. You're not just kind of blasting out and getting a number at the end of the race. You're thinking about your tactics, you're thinking about your feeding, you're thinking about your strategies. And also, for everybody in the race, there will be lows and highs, and there will be things that they'll need to think about. And there's a kind of richness to that I really enjoy. In terms of the end-to-end, I've always enjoyed travel and I've always enjoyed journeys. So kind of looking at Land's End or looking at John O'Groats and thinking about the journey between them, it's quite poetic that that course has always existed, and that if you look in the history books, all the people who've done it in the past have been over those climbs. That history or that kind of sense of a journey that everyone's always done is nice, I guess. Yeah, it links everything together. It was an evolution of realising that it was even possible. I think the financial investment or the emotional investment and the training investment to get to a point where you are sat outside the south door of the hotel at Land's End is massive. And you have to take so many people along with you, both physically and also metaphorically, that you need to think that you'll be taken seriously, I guess, as a contender. And then the strange feeling then is, as soon as you kind of make that call and you notify that you're going to go on the Friday, it felt like you've stepped onto a conveyor belt that you suddenly can't stop. There was something always reassuring about the fact that you hadn't quite said you were going to go, and then now you've said, this is it, Friday's it, and everything just goes haywire. Our start time was 8 o'clock, so we were there by just before 7 o'clock. I remember standing by the signpost and just feeling, this kind of sense of trepidation, I guess. Genuinely not really nerves, just an awareness that I wanted to enjoy what it felt like to be in that position, because it's not something that most people get to experience. But it was a lovely morning and the flag was blowing the right way, so we knew that at least at the start the weather would be pretty good. And then before you know it, the timekeeper calls you up to the south door, and I was being held up by John Williams of the Mersey Road Club, who organises the Mersey Road 24, and I felt quite strongly that I wanted him to be there at the start. And I was wearing number 85 from the Mersey Road Club as well, which they'd very kindly lent me for the event. I'm not really superstitious, but it felt right to have something of theirs with me. and then they count down and you're off.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Go, mate!
So when you leave Land's End, I think, you know, the key to any time trial is don't start too hard. But I guess for this one, it really, really is don't start too hard. And, you know, I was conscious that I should barely feel like I'm pedaling.
136.7.
And then when you get onto the dual carriageway, the A30 at Penzance, it's just like home territory for a time trialist, really. You just kind of settle down, get aero, and just tap it out. When I finally got to the dual carriageway, there had been a bit of a tailback behind me on the run into Penzance, and a little guy came alongside in a purple Nissan Micra, and he wound down his window, flicked me a V sign and told me he hoped that I failed. Just, I think, off the back of the fact that he'd been delayed, but it made me chuckle. The target time to go through 100 miles was probably something like 4:10, and I went through in about 4:08 or something like that. You know, probably just under 25 miles an hour, and it all went perfectly to plan. I was really happy. I remember, you know, knowing I was up on schedule just really gradually, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I think by Exeter I was probably about 8-10 minutes up on schedule, so it's perfect. As you come into Exeter, you're then off the dual carriageway, makes a bit of a change, and you switch on to the A38, which is actually, it's the main road to Bristol, but you spend a lot of time on the A38 then for the next 100, 200 miles. And that kind of then took me through to Bristol. Riding up the hill into Bristol, loads of my old teammates came out, and there's a kind of small crowd on the climb. So it was a really special moment. And I think that was probably where it sunk in what I was doing, because to see other people out on the route and people who come out to cheer was fantastic. I had no idea any of these people were going to be there. We left Bristol and headed north on the A38, and you go kind of towards Gloucester and then wind your way up towards the Midlands. And we rolled into the kind of 12-hour mark at about 270 miles or something like that, which was still slightly up on target, which was great. I think as the night came in and it was dark, I enjoy riding at night. We got the kit on early, we got the lights on, and you kind of work your way north of Wolverhampton and then eventually to Warrington. And then when I got to the A6, I think towards Lancaster, saw a blur of yellow by the side of the road, and then realised it was actually Gethin Butler, who's the record holder. Which kind of felt really special, because I thought, you know, it's quite indicative of the community of long distance time trialling, that someone would come out and do that to watch someone else break their record. And also it felt like quite a compliment from him that he obviously considered that I was, you know, a serious enough contender that it was worth his while coming out and supporting, so he could, I guess, say he was there.
Here we're going up Shap here.
This is the early hours of the morning now, and there was still a tailwind, which is great. And then I suppose the first really big climb is Shap, which is out of Kendal going north on the A6. And there's a lot of kind of iconic photos of all riders climbing Shap. You know, anyone who's ever done the end-to-end pretty much will have gone over that climb, and certainly anyone who's trying to break the record. And it was nice, really. I was in a nice low gear, and I was just tapping it out on my power threshold, and I knew, you know, van behind me, people up the road, and there's a real excitement.
Is he stopping? Atmospheric enough for you?
There's a lay-by close to the top, and there's, you know, this was at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm sure there was like 20, 25 people in this lay-by.
Atmospheric enough for you?
Hi, Gethin.
I feel like I'm...
And I was obviously just high on the adrenaline, because I shouted something fairly incomprehensible at Gethin, which I think was meant to be thank you.
Thank you so much.
and then just got going really. You know, again, felt really special.
Go on, Mike.
Keep going.
Don't get cold.
Hi, Gethin.
Yeah, basically you're just on the brow. Just,
Are you doing all right?
Yes, just about.
Good.
Wrecked your night's sleep though.
Yeah,
Just bloody come through here in the daytime. I do.
Okay.
It was only as we approached Carlisle that we started to get an inkling that the weather wasn't going to play ball as much as we'd hoped. We crossed into Scotland at Gretna. By this time it had definitely started raining, and we're probably at about 23 hours. We nominally registered that we might try and break the 24-hour record, so that's the RRA 24-hour record rather than the time trial 24-hour record. And in the rain, I remember getting a message that it was on if I pushed on a bit. Now, with hindsight, I don't know whether that was the right decision for me to do that, but maybe I got greedy or I wanted to do it. And so it's definitely kind of, for that half an hour leading up to the 24-hour mark, I was pushing quite hard and it was absolutely chucking it down. Eventually rolled through and we broke the 24-hour record, which Gethin had set on his ride, by about 2.5, 3 miles, I think, something like that. And I had been worried about how it was going to feel getting to 24 hours because that was kind of going into the unknown. And there's film footage of me pulling up to the car afterwards, after like 24 hours and 15 minutes. And I say something like, oh, I think I'll just have a 10-minute break now. And the crew are like, no, you can't. You just got to keep going. And that was a pretty difficult moment. I think that realization that, wow, it doesn't stop now, like it's only just started, was really hard. And I think probably that was the first time I realised that perhaps it wasn't all going to go to plan and it was going to be quite tricky. And I was starting to not be able to manage my own body temperature and not realise that. So the second day is all a bit of a blur, but I think we were crossing the Forth Road Bridge around about lunchtime. And then you head north from there towards Cowdenbeath eventually. And that was where I started to realise I might have some problems with my neck. It was starting to get tired and I was starting to have problems lifting my head up to look at the road ahead. Pulled over at a bus stop and started to kind of tell the team that that's what was going on. Got on my way, and then you cross a floodplain and you come into the town. Perth's kind of quite iconic in terms of end-to-end folklore because I think someone, probably John Woodburn, had quipped that any fool can get to Perth, and that's where it starts to get difficult. And on my recce, I'd also got to Perth and then kind of seen the signs for the A9 North through the Highlands and thought, well, I'll leave that for another day and gone home. Just outside Perth, I pulled over and said, look, my neck's really hurting now and I'm really struggling to hold this time trial position in that I can stay in position, but I can't see the road ahead. So that we made the decision to switch to the spare bike, which is still a time trial bike, but it's kind of got a slightly more generous setup. But if I'm being honest, I wasn't very positive at that point about how my neck was going to pan out. I was quite worried. Just starting to get these feelings that perhaps this wasn't really going to work, and I couldn't envisage how it was going to carry on, and it was still absolutely chucking it down. As you come out of Perth and you hit the A9 proper, you've got this feeling that the A9 is going to go on for a long time. And I was having to lift my head very carefully to look at the road ahead. And now, you know, I've looked back and I know that the support crew are very worried about the road conditions, what was going on. and how on earth we were going to kind of carry on moving forward from that position.
This is still another 2 miles to go, isn't it? Do you think?
Current speed is 11.9 miles
If that's
per
the
hour.
case, then I think we've got a problem.
Well done, Mike. You're giving it the best shot, so I'm very proud of you.
The reality was biting then. I had reached, it sounds like I'd reached a point where I definitely wasn't enjoying it. And it's not that I was necessarily setting out to enjoy it, but I had these creeping feelings that I didn't really want to be doing it anymore. And I think that was the worry. And then I started stopping whenever I saw my support crew, just pulling over just because I could talk to them really. And they realised this, so then they stopped being there in the lay-bys. So I started to feel really lonely. And then I suppose my kind of internal monologue started telling me that this was it and it wasn't going to happen. And I remember thinking very concrete thoughts like, if we stop now, then we can get the crew back to Perth and we can get hotels and it would be much more convenient. i.e. the chance of me succeeding now is pretty close to zero, so it makes sense to stop now rather than press on up the road where it'll all be more complicated. And once you get those thoughts, it's really hard to suppress them and it's really hard not to concentrate on them. The way I've tried to describe it to people is that, you know, when you're doing a race, you've got this kind of fire burning inside you that's determined to get to the end of the race and do as well as you can. And for me, coming out of Perth and going up that climb, that fire was just kind of slowly burning out, and I wasn't able to give it any fuel, and I could feel it burning out and I couldn't do anything about it. And there was definitely a couple of times when I decided, well, that's definitely it. And so eventually we pulled over in this lay-by, and we had actually discussed beforehand like who would decide when it was over, and it was going to be me and Helen and then Tim, my teammate. And Helen and Tim and I had a meeting, and I kind of said, well, this is it, it's over. And I remember looking at Tim and saying to him, I said to him, you know, if you were me, you'd stop. I know you would. You'd stop, wouldn't you? And Tim did say yes. He said, yeah, I said I'd stop. And then I turned to Helen and basically I was trying to convince her that I had to stop. I was pleading with her to let me stop. And I looked at her and just kind of looked into her eyes and realised that she didn't think it was it, and I had to carry on. She said to me that, do you reckon you can just keep going for 20 more minutes? And what's weird was at that moment, I suddenly felt quite indignant. I think it was because I felt like she didn't understand the problem. I felt like, of course I can keep going for 20 minutes. That's not the problem. It's the 11 hours I've got to do after that that's the problem. But somehow that indignation was the kind of oxygen that the fire needed to get going again. I jumped on the bike and thought, I must have thought something stupid, like, I'll show her 20 minutes, right, I'm going to go do that 20 minutes. But then during that 20 minutes, it finally stopped raining and I suddenly got warm again, and then just suddenly realised that actually it was okay and I was still going and I was still up on schedule. And if it didn't keep raining, there was a chance that this whole thing might be all right. I'd kind of managed to find a couple of ways of dealing with my neck, which was this issue. I was having to use my hand to lift my head up on occasions, but it was working. And I think as quickly as it had gone away, the positivity was starting to come back. At the end of the Highlands, you've got this kind of cracking descent, which is like 7 kilometers down into Inverness. And as I came down there, the sun came out, which was lovely. So you're going super fast. I was able to get aero, and what it kind of meant was it reset the clock, and it gave me a real kind of physical but also emotional reset. You know, this is it. You're now on the final stretch, and we're going to really go for it. But of course, what you don't realise is that your body's been pushed for a long time, and it still continues to get worse in ways that you didn't anticipate. I lost some feeling in my left hand, and I started to get some kind of uncomfortable bits and pieces around the rest of my body. It feels like a kind of strange out of body experience, really. Like you're watching your body slowly stop functioning as well. But actually, until you've been there, you don't really know which bits of your body are going to break and in which order.
43 hours completed. You've covered 853.8 miles. Your current speed is 22.1 miles per hour.
The bit out of Inverness is a funny bit because it's beautiful scenery and the roads are quick and they're good roads. But you have this kind of impending knowledge that you've still got these two really difficult climbs to come. You've got Helmsdale and Berrydale. They're quite iconic on the route. I guess there had always been that moment of thinking, what will my legs be like when they get to Helmsdale? And they were fine. And I knew from 30 seconds into the climb, it was all going to be okay. I think that was the key moment when I realised that I was going to get the record. And then you descend down into Berrydale village, and the Berrydale climb is much steeper, but much shorter. And there's some good pictures on the internet of various, past riders coming up Berrydale, and quite a lot of them were walking because they didn't have the right gears for it. And so again, Berrydale was a kind of another key moment. And as I came down into the village, I remember going through the kind of bottom of the dip before the climb, and Helen was stood by the roadside, and I shouted, "Is this Berrydale?" She said yes. And then my aunt and uncle were on the first switchback, and they were cheering. And then the rest of the support crew were lined out just running up the road. I honestly remember thinking, I just can't believe how quick I'm going up this climb. And I remember thinking, just suddenly having this huge rush of emotion of being aware that I was there doing this climb, on the way to breaking the record. And it was quite an overwhelming moment. I just wanted so desperately to remember what it felt like to be there at that moment, because my best friends were there and my family were there and they were all cheering, and I was kind of climbing this iconic climb to break an iconic record. And you think, my goodness, if you can't remember a moment like this in your life, what can you remember? I mean, I absolutely busted it up, Berrydale. I checked afterwards, I just missed top 10 on Strava with that climb, which I was pretty chuffed with, bearing in mind I had about 800 miles in the bank. There was, I can't remember, something like 30 miles left. And I remember thinking, I need to make sure I break this record by as much as possible. But similarly thinking, I don't want this thing to end. I don't want to not be doing this anymore. This was probably 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And there's a few dodgy roundabouts. And I look back now and think I was probably quite lucky because I wasn't really concentrating properly. And everyone knows those like sketchy mini roundabouts with the grease on them. I got through and then got onto that final road, and you see kind of John O'Groats 16 or something, and then John O'Groats 13 and John O'Groats 7. and this overwhelming sense that you just can't really believe it's happening. I can't put into words what that's like. And then as you come towards John O'Groats, there's one last final climb. It's actually quite steep. And then you kind of come over the crest of that climb, and you can see the road like laid out in front of you, and you can see the lights of John O'Groats. And because of the time of year, I think it was even starting to get light. It was, you know, half past 3 in the morning, and you roll down into the village. And I remember beckoning for the support van to come alongside, because I had some idea that I was going to say something emotional to them. But they were having none of it. They were just told me to get on with it, which was the right thing to say. And then you come around that final corner, and if I'm being honest, I don't really remember it. I've seen the video footage more now than actual direct memories. But I kind of rolled up to the timekeepers and then just stood there with my head in my hands.
Wow, I've got fireworks. Hey!
Okay, so on the 15th to 17th of June 2018, we broke the Land's End to John O'Groats record. I cycled 839 miles in a time of 43 hours, 25 minutes and 13 seconds. I think I had a stop time of about an hour and a quarter, which means that my average speed for the route is just under 20 miles an hour, moving average, and it's about 19.3 or something actual average speed. My plan was to ride to an average power by the end of about 210 watts. I was kind of doing about 230 watts on the flat and trying to stick to 280 watts on the climbs, and then freewheeling most of the descents. It's been, a life-changing experience, I suppose. I've been cycling for a long time and always tried to keep kind of my cycling life and other bits of my life quite separate. Don't really talk that much about what I've done in cycling because conscious, it's not something that everyone's interested in. But this has kind of blown that out of the water a bit. I think that doing the end-to-end has changed the way people see me, which is good and bad. And being a school teacher, you meet a lot of people, you meet a lot of kids at the school, and some of the younger boys come up to me and they're like, "Oh, we know about you and the thing you did." And that's strange because you kind of think, well, no, I'm really just a maths teacher and my job is to teach you algebra, not for you to have a changed view of me because of a bike ride I did. I don't really like the word proud, but it's made me proud of what we did together as a team. So I think it probably has changed me, but it's quite hard to put your finger on how it's changed you. You're just kind of part of the evolving tapestry of what makes you up.